Crowley on BBC London 94.9, and that's the Manic Street Preachers. A very important song as far as the Manic Street Preachers are concerned, A Designed for Life, which was a #2 back in 1996. And I'm extremely pleased to say that all the way through until Charlie get it at 8 o'clock, James Dean Bradfield from the band is going to be my very special guest. Welcome to BBC London 94.9.
Howdy, how you doing, guys?
It's good to see you, James. Let's talk about that song and its importance as far as, you know, the band is concerned as well.
Well, that was probably the first song that we completed after Richie went missing. And we'd already kind of made a decision after about 4 or 5 months after the actual events of what happened with Richie. We'd already made a decision that we were going to try and record and see what would happen, and well, that would be, you know, the litmus test as to whether we could carry on in any kind of form. And Designed for Life was the first song that we probably wrote and completed, you know, post-Richie events. And, you know, without sounding too dramatic, it's kind of like, you know, the song that gave us, you know, it gave us, you know, the strength to carry on, kind of thing, because it made us realise that we could still be like the Manic Street Preachers, but, you know, we were going to be a slightly different band, and that we could move on from, you know, the events that had happened around us.
Yeah, I mean, talking of Richie, James, as well, I mean, there was you know, reports, I think, about a week or so ago about, you know, a body being found. Yeah. I mean, what's it like for you guys, you know, not sort of like, not knowing, you know, not sort of like having that kind of sort of closure, you know, not knowing what's happened?
Thanks, you watch The Sopranos a lot. Closure, we want closure on this. It's not that, it's kind of, I think, what people don't really understand is that, you know, a long time ago we kind of refused to kind of get drawn into that kind of conjecture, that kind of Italian B-movie kind of script conjecture of like that he's been spotted in the Canary Islands, he's been spotted in Goa, that kind of like he's been spotted on Mars, that they've found his bones on a beach in kind of like, you know, the Cayman Islands or something, you know. We had so many of those rumours that it's just like some horrible like B-movie script, you know, and like we know that they're all just rubbish, basically, you know, we just do. And so we've got to the point that when we actually just open a certain tabloid and see the headline, you know, bones of missing Richie Manic fished out of river, then the first thing we think is, well, we know that's rubbish. #2, we know that they haven't even just like, you know, cross-checked that story with the police. #3, they know that that's just not true. #4, who's gonna be opening this paper and seeing that headline? His parents. It's just the most outrageously, you know, flippant, irresponsible behaviour you could ever expect of a journalist. They're actually saying, bones fished out of river, your son has been found, mate. Kind of thing. And, you know, his parents are opening that, and it's just the most horrible thing they could ever go through. Yeah. You know, it reduces them to the most terrible emotional distress you could imagine. So it just annoys me so much, because it's just terrible. It's a terrible way to actually just, it's almost like, you know, the most horrific kind of like Halloween trick. Yeah, you know, it's just like, all right, Mr. and Mrs. Edwards, yeah, we found his bones. No, we didn't. Ha 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 ha. Yeah. You know, it's just terrible.
Well, let's talk of better things if we can. I mean, we're here to celebrate the release of this compilation album, Lipstick Traces, A Secret History of Manic Street Preachers, a double CD collection of B-sides, cover versions, and also unreleased rarities. You're going to hear some of them over the next 60 minutes. Let's talk a little bit initially about what you've been up to this year as well, because I know this week, for instance, you've had a busy week as far as doing sign-ins are concerned around the country. Tell us about them and what kind of sort of reactions you've been getting from people as well.
Well, the last 3 weeks or so we've been doing lots of festivals and stuff. We played Denmark, Finland, Ireland, and we've done a couple of festivals in Britain. I've been over to New York to meet a producer, and this week we've been doing lots of sign-ins, so in Manchester, Glasgow, Birmingham and London. And kind of, you know, it's kind of strange because it's been like around about 1,000 people at all these sign-ins and stuff. And like, you know, of course it's nice to meet the fans, man, press the flesh and all that kind of stuff. But like after 500 sign-ins, suddenly I start waning, and I do start getting a bit, you know, ratty and fatigued. Whereas Nick just treats it as this kind of like, you know, big kind of like, you know, almost like, you know, he's doing some kind of straw poll. He's just looking at what everybody's wearing. It's interesting to see what some of our fans are wearing now. I mean, they've gone back to wearing lots of camouflage. Or like, you know, I've seen how many kind of like, you know, Clash t-shirts our fans are wearing at the moment. Very interesting. And some of them are only 12 years old. How are they into us? And he's really just into the fact, he's really into like staring people in the eye and seeing what people think, you know, whereas after 500 I'm thinking of my shepherd's pie in the oven. You know, so it's just kind of, it is really cool to meet them, because, you know, a lot of people are just real train spotters and they want to know what tunings have been used in a record, or where this quote is from, or just a lot of people just want to know when you're playing next, or what the next album's going to be like. So it is a lovely experience most of the time.
But I think it's sort of fair to say that you know, the Manics do enjoy a special relationship with your fans. In fact, they've had some sort of input as far as this new compilation is concerned as well, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like, you know, there were we did do a kind of like, you know, an interweb vote, as my dad would say, on what were their favourite B-sides, and we did do a lot of, we did take a lot of their opinions and include them on the record, you know. I mean, there are some songs in there that I particularly don't like anymore, but like, you know, some of the fans insisted that they should be on there. So, you know, I think, you know, we've woke up to the fact that we can't be so righteous and like, you know, so completist in our own kind of point of view that you've got to be much more inclusive in other people's opinions sometimes. Let's
talk about some of those festivals that you've done so far this year as well, because I mean, what's it like for you guys kind of playing them as well? I mean, you know, do you have to kind of sort of approach them sort of differently?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like every festival is slightly different. I mean, when you play Witness Festival on Ireland, you know that it's going to be easier because, like, we've played there before, and it's, you know, it's a very up for it kind of crowd. And, you know, the last time we played Witness, they were so ferociously kind of like legless that you know it's going to be an easier job. But when you play Glastonbury, it's different because we've got so much history with Glastonbury, with the Crappergate thing with Billy Bragg. And like, you know, so when we actually got to play there again, you know, we felt like, you know, the villains returning. Oh, it's the Manics, you know, they're not really into the spirit of Glastonbury, but they turned up again. But we had a great gig at Glastonbury. We had a really good gig, and myself and Nick said just after the gig, you know, at Glastonbury, that it's taken us 14 years to get a good gig there. You know, it took us 14 years to actually put in a good performance at Glastonbury, so...
You got there in the end.
We got there in the end, yeah.
Well, let's pause for some music. As I mentioned, we're talking about this new compilation album, which is out now, Lipstick Traces, A Secret History of Manic Street Preachers, as well as the B-sides and cover versions. There's also a couple of unreleased tracks as well. Judge Yourself being one song, which was a song that I think you originally wrote for the Judge Dredd movie. What happened there?
Well, kind of like, we just got asked, basically, to, you know, to see if it... Because I think somebody knew that Richie was a massive kind of like, you know, kind of Judge Dredd fan kind of thing in terms of the comics. So we got asked to write a song for it, and we tried, and at the end, we didn't feel as if we'd felt comfortable with that process of being asked and given a brief to write a song for something. And then, you know, we saw the results and we thought, well, we don't really work well that way. So it just stayed, you know, in the locker for ages and ages and ages.
But it's out now for people to hear. And the other new track is a track that was slated as a single at one point. Tell us about Forever Delayed before we hear it.
Yeah, that's just kind of like one of my most bizarre decisions. You know, the greatest hits was called Forever Delayed. I think we had a great song called Forever Delayed lined up to be like, you know, the track on Forever Delayed, called Forever Delayed, and we decided not to release it. So kind of like,
Manics.
Yeah, so it's a good, like, lost single, basically.
BBC London 94.9. We're celebrating the release of this new compilation from the Manic Street Preachers. James Dean Bradfield, my very special guest. The album's entitled Lipstick Traces, A Secret History of Manic Street Preachers, and that's one of the two unreleased songs on the album. As I mentioned a little bit earlier on, there was talk of that being a single at one point, but it didn't happen. That was Forever Delayed. Let's go back to the beginning if we can. But actually, before we do that though, James, let's talk about the band's sort of history as far as the capital is concerned. I'm always sort of interested to sort of know, you know, what memories that you might have of first play in London. I mean, are there any kind of sort of distinctive ones that spring to mind? Yeah,
I mean, the first gig we ever played in London was in a place called the Horse and Groom on Great Portland Street, and it was connected with a fanzine. Basically, it was a little gig in an upstairs room in the Horse and Groom on Great Portland Street. And we turned up, and there was, you know, I think it was an audience of about 40 people, but it was kind of full in this little kind of room upstairs. And, you know, our first gig in London, Bob Stanley, you know, from Set Etienne, and then journalist and Melody Maker was there. And, you know, it was just, to be honest, it was a great gig. You know, I remember we did the gig and we got off £40, and we were such kind of nice Welsh Presbyterian kind of boys that we kind of gave our £40 back at the end and said, no, it was just a privilege to play. You know, and everything. And that's where we got our first live review from.
What would that have meant to you, you know, coming to London and then kind of playing for the first time as well? I mean, you know, was it a big deal as far as all four of you, you know, were concerned?
It was, definitely. I mean, kind of like, of course, you know, we drove along the Westway, and like, you know, Richie driving with, you know, with one hand and the other hand, yeah, that's where Mick Jones's grandma used to live, kind of thing. walking up into Oxford Street and just seeing the big HMV store on Oxford Street, to be honest, was enough, really, because like suddenly there was a massive, instead of going to Spiller's Records in Cardiff, which is a brilliant record shop, but sometimes you can't find what you've got, you can't find what you want, you've got to order, and suddenly you're in this massive record shop and it was just like, kiss the floor. Yes, I can find the McCarthy album. I can find the Sweet Right album, kind of thing. So just those little things, and just, I think we want to, I can't remember, I think we want to drive down Agar Grove as well, because there was a lot of Clash history down there and everything. And we just want to do those things. A lot of it was just centred around the Clash, and we just want to find, street names and tower blocks connected with them, because we were really, really young and still massive fans.
Yeah. Well, let's go back even further then and talk about the birth of the Manic Street Preachers and what, inspired the coming together of the band as well, because all four of you went to the same school, didn't you? I mean, obviously Sean's your cousin.
Yeah.
So there's a history there.
Well, basically, kind of, myself and Sean were cousins. Sean was a year older than me. Myself and Nick were best friends from, say, around about the age of 5. And we lived around about a mile apart, but went to the same school. And, Richie was kind of like lived, around about the same area as Nick. And when I was very young, I didn't really know Richie that well, but I knew him, I knew him well enough to play in the same football team as him and stuff. And then as we all got older, we just all started really converging,
So, I mean,
because Sean and Richie were in the same year at school as well. So Sean and Richie were friends in the same year. And then round about, when we were all about 13, 14, all started kind of coming together a bit.
So did you all kind of pick up instruments at the same time, or had some of you sort of started a little bit earlier than others?
No, I kind of bought I think the two most important albums for me, I was around about 14, I bought Life's a Riot, with Spy vs. Spy, Billy Bragg, yeah. Ironically enough, these days. And it was Given Enough Rope, actually, by The Clash. And, I remember myself and Nick, we slightly drifted round about the age of 10, then round about 14 we came back together because we were both getting the same kind of music again. The Smiths kind of brought us together as well. And so we decided we were going to be this amazing, great, songwriting partnership. So kind of like he came into school one day and gave me his first lyric. So I had to go and buy a guitar then. So I bought a guitar off one of our mates called Matthew Orton for 12 quid. It was like a Gibson copy, a K copy from a catalogue. And so we just wrote our first song, basically, and it was called Aftermath. It was about the miners' strike, I think. So we wrote that when we were about 14, 15. And I think, just myself and Nick just started realising that suddenly it was us against everybody else, because, our record collection was getting more obscure, more indie, but it was kind of drawn together with things like, The Clash and the Smiths and Billy Bragg, and then it was just like, the obscure undergrowth with indie stuff like Big Flame and McCarthy and things like that. So like, I think it was just that kind of romantic outsiderism, just like we felt as if we were different to the rest of the school. Sean barged his way on rehearsal, because myself and Nick were rehearsing in the living room one Saturday. He came downstairs from the bedroom and got some tin cans out and started banging them round. I was really pissed off because I didn't want my cousin in the band. And then kind of like, I think we just vaguely said, we need somebody cooler than James to be in the band, and we just thought Richie.
Because he was originally driving you around, or just a friend?
Yeah, he was originally driving us around, because he'd gone off to university at that point, but we'd still been talking about it. And kind of like, it's just kind of like, first of all, he took the photograph of our first single, the cover of our first single, Suicide Alley, which is a replica of the first Clash album cover. And then he started driving us around, and then kind of he bought a guitar, and then he got into the band, kind of thing. So he served his apprenticeship, and we always knew he was going to be in the band. And I know that sounds a bit evil. It sounds as if we kind of like stringed him along, like, okay, you've earned the privilege to be in this unit. You're in. But kind of like, that's just where you are when you're young.
I mean, you spoke a little bit earlier on about, that kind of sort of being, that sense of being outsiders as well. What about the, the kind of sort of look of the band as well? I mean, how did that evolve? Because again, going back to, the late 80s, I mean, you look very different to, the other groups that were sort of happening at the time, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like, we just saw kind of like, the bagginess of the Manchester scene, which was just about to come round. We saw that as metaphorical laziness. It's baggy, saggy, listless, styleless, kind of like, lots of, it wasn't kind of like prime offcuts to us. It was just like a metaphor for just being lazy. So we decided to go like skin tight, white, kind of like, strychnine kind of look. We want to be, the opposite of all that. And we saw it as an ascetic polar opposite in every sense. It was metaphorical, it was just like visual, it was everything. And we just, saw kind of, not saying I completely think all this now because, of course, when you're young, you're very, very extreme in the way you think, and that's why a lot of good things come out of it, because, you know, you're completely subjective about everything. But kind of like, we just saw the drug culture and, like, you know, just the new culture of just, like, you know, buying design labels, etc., as we saw at that time, the way we saw it, as just being, like, you know, a complete admission of defeat from the working classes, that the only way out was through lifestyle and through consumerism. And we just thought, like, we've got to be, you know, we've got to have, like, you know, a religion without being God-fearing. We've got to have some kind of, like, you know, ideology to get us through this kind of working class admission of defeat.
It's Gary Crowley on BBC London 94.9. My very special guest, James Dean Bradfield from the Manic Street Preachers. And we're playing tracks from this new compilation album, a 2-CD collection of B-sides, cover versions and unreleased rarities. The title of the album is Lipstick Traces, A Secret History of Manic Street Preachers. And that's a song, James, that you particularly wanted us to play, Donkeys. Why did you want to hear this one?
I just think
so special.
I think we just kind of like, it's just one of those songs that kind of got away. We've got a couple of songs like Prologue to History, like Donkeys, that should have been on albums and perhaps might have made the difference between a 6 out of 10 and a 8 out of 10 if it included those songs on albums, you know. And a song like Donkeys that is a pure kind of Richie lyric, and I think it's, like, you know, one of his best lyrics. It's lovely, it's beautiful.
I mean, we're speaking in the first half hour about you know, the band coming together in Blackwood, in South Wales, and also, you know, the influences. I mean, as well as music, though, you know, literature was also an important influence for the Manics, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, kind of. I think the most important thing when you're young is just, like, if you read a book, you just enjoy reading it, but you don't necessarily have to understand much of it. As long as you understand just a bit of it and the premise of the book, you know, it's just like, it's that process of just self-education kind of thing. I mean, like, you know, I remember my dad had a copy of The Ragged Trouser Philanthropist by Robert Tressel, because, you know, my dad was quite big in his in his union and stuff, and I remember reading that, you know. I remember just reading Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre, because Matt Johnson from the kind of was in his Enemy interview, he was carrying around a bottle of vodka in one pocket and a bottle of Nausea in the other. I thought, wow, he's cool, I've got to read that. And you know, I read it when I was 15, and I only understood a bit of it, to be honest, and then I read it again and again. And, like, it's just that process of just, well, I was kind of educated by the enemy a tiny bit, you know. Sorry to say these days.
No, because I think I remember sort of hearing or reading that, you know, you kind of sort of set yourselves a task as a band sort of pretty early on after reading, you know, the Enemy Top 100 list in the late 80s, that, you know, you set yourself the challenge of trying to hear all of these albums.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like, well, we kind of, they were the Top 100, me and Nick had a competition to see who could get all 100 of the albums. I think, you know, I think we gave up because I'd bought a kind of Captain Beefheart album and I didn't like it, and he bought What's Going On by Marvin Gaye and he didn't like that. So we just thought, oh, we're just going to be lumped with lots of albums that we don't like, basically. But, like, yeah, it was just, you know, I mean, it's amazing that we bought lots of those, like the Band album I hated when I was, like, you know, 15. I despised it. And I love it now, obviously, because I'm older. So kind of like, it's just those, I think we were just force-feeding things, you know, on ourselves that we didn't quite understand at the time, but just like we wanted to understand. I think that's the most important thing about being young, just trying to digest it, even if you don't quite understand it.
I mean, you know, talking about being young as well, I mean, you know, we talked about, you know, the kind of musical influences that sort of went into, you know, the sort of melting pot of the Manic Street Preachers, and also the literature as well. I mean, what would have been the sort of, you know, reaction from sort of like school friends and friends to, you know, you guys kind of sort of totally losing yourself, you know, to this sort of world of music and words as well? I mean, what kind of things were they into?
Well, at that point in time, just about when we were about to leave comprehensive school, you know, Simple Minds had kicked in the arena sense, you know, Don't You Forget About Me, Alive and Kickin', stuff like that, you know, just lots of, like, borderline football cashy boys who were like, who thought Jim Kerr was God. And of course I had this ferocious kind of, like, you know, snobbery about it, because I was like, that's, Simple Minds used to be amazing. Reel to Reel Cacophony, Empires and Dance, the European Travelogue, not this rubbish. God, you just don't understand, you should all die, kind of thing, you know. So it was kind of like, it was just that kind of like, again, it was just, you know, we just felt special because we were kind of like wrapped in our own kind of like, you know, obscurism, basically.
Yeah.
You know, but it was no big deal. I mean, kind of like, it was fine. It was, to be honest, it's fun, really.
Well, it's certainly got you to hear. I mean, we spoke a little bit earlier on about, you know, your memories of kind of sort of playing in London for the first time over in Great Portland Street at the Horse and Groom. What other kind of, you know, sort of, you know, defining memories do you have of those early days and those, you know, experiences as well? I mean, you know, you must have experienced so much, you know, together. I mean, is that the kind of sort of period, if you do look back, that you kind of sort of look back at most fondly, you know, those early victories?
Yeah, I suppose it's weird trying to think like that, because at the end of the day now, I think, you know, we've played more gigs and released more records without Richie than we did with him. So a lot of those, the period seems to be diminishing more and more as we go on, which is kind of sad. But I suppose right at the start, days of Motown Junk, when we first came to London to record, and we realised we were recording in the same room as where Maggie May was recorded, you know, they were like special moments, and just remembering how naive and happy he was about things like that. And also, to be honest, you know, in a strange way, the Audio Bible was a great period, because when we were recording that album, nothing as yet had really happened in terms of, you know, any kind of breakdowns or whatever you want to call it. And it was a really, you know, beautiful kind of little romantic period recording the Holy Bible, because we were all together doing, you know, kind of like, you know, we were clocking in every day, and we were just doing it in this tiny studio in Cardiff, and, you know, it was just a really cool period. You know, for such a depressing album, we were all so happy at that point in time.
And focused.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about another defining memory that you know that saw the band, I think, being the first kind of sort of Western, you know, kind of, you know, music band to play the country. Cuba, of course, which you went to a couple of years ago. I mean, what kind of sort of memories do you have of that visit? Because of course you got to meet the man as well, didn't you?
Yeah,
Mr.
I mean,
Castro.
there are a lot of kind of misconceptions about it. I think a lot of people think we went there with a press kit. So, like, you know. Manics land, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock, meet Fidel. You know, it wasn't like that. It was, you know, we didn't know we were meeting him until 15 minutes before we met him.
You were meant to get on a plane as well. Didn't he actually sort of say that he could hold the plane for you as well?
Yeah, it's kind of, we'd met him twice, and the third time we had a call, and he was like, you know, I want the boys to come to dinner with me. And, you know, don't get me wrong, you know, when I met him, I was bowled over by it. You know, I couldn't help but be, like, you know, impressed by how humorous he was, and he wasn't ranting any kind of ideology at us. It was quite, you know, quippish and quite, you know, humorous. But at that point we thought, right, we feel as if we are getting roped into, we feel like, you know, the flip side of Noel Gallagher at Downing Street, you know.
Being used.
Yeah, a tiny bit. And, like, you know, we did really come over here for, you know, for the want of a better phrase, a cultural exchange. So we thought, right, we just declined. We just said, no, sorry, we can't come round for dinner. Then he called back and he said, no, we said, we can't come for dinner because we got a flight to catch. And he went, then he called back and said, tell them not to worry, I will hold the plane. And we were just like, this is getting a bit too much now, because we are getting roped into some kind of, yeah, we were getting roped into, you know, some propaganda thing. And that was a misconception. Everybody thought we were going over there with our fist in the air going, yes, brothers, we will unite. We weren't. But we were just, like, you know, pursuing that freedom to actually step outside the record industry and go somewhere and play in front of people that knew nothing about us. And also not exploit a situation where we couldn't sell a record, because, you know, obviously there's no Sony relations with Cuba. And we wanted to step outside, you know, the record industry and actually just, you know, perhaps in the back of our minds just think, well, you know, just because America's got an embargo on the place doesn't mean we can't go there, you know. But everybody thought, like, you know, we were trying to be, you know, Wolfie from Citizen Smith, you know, which was, it couldn't be further from the truth, you know.
And what about memories of the actual gig itself as well?
Well, that was the best thing about the whole place was the gig, you know. I mean, the whole trip was the gig. You know, it reminded me of a 60s gig, because people suddenly were just like, huh, what is this? What is this? They play, where's the rhythm in this? No, I cannot dance. Ooh, I quite like this. And suddenly people dance in the aisles, and it was quite like, it was like, you know, a 60s gig. Suddenly people were kind of bop into us, which is strange, like, you know, like dancing in a John Hughes film, but with more rhythm. You know, so it was really cute, because, like, you know, there was a barrier, a language barrier. They had no historical kind of, like, you know, knowledge of us, and, you know, we didn't know how they'd react as an audience, and it really, really worked, you know. So that was the best memory. It really was the best memory of the whole thing, and there was the whole point of the trip as well.
Let's pause for some music. There's 2 Clash covers on the compilation album, Lipstick Traces. We're going to play one of them. This is a live version of Train in Vain, one of my favourite tracks from London Calling. Where was this recorded, this version?
This is recorded in Newcastle, I believe. It's one of 2 kind of like live Clash covers on the album, and we've actually achieved the impossible with the other one, What's My Name. We actually sound rougher than the Clash live, which is a pretty mean feat, on What's My Name, but this one, Train in Vain, is a bit tidier.
Manic Street Preachers and their take on the Strummer Jones song Train in Vain, as featured on this new compilation album Lipstick Traces, A Secret History of Manic Street Preachers, which is out now. James Dean Bradfield is my very special guest, all the way through to Charlie's going to be along at 8 o'clock. You spoke a little bit earlier on about, you know, coming to London for the first time and, you know, checking out some of the sort of Clash, sort of, you know, kind of rock sites or whatever. I mean, what was it about the band that was so sort of, you know, special to you for when the group first started?
The Clash are just like, you know, were and are the best band I've ever seen. I mean, kind of like when Tony Wilson did that retrospective on all the So It Goes stuff and everything, you know,
that punk compilation thing, yeah,
kind of like we saw the Clash do What's My Name, Garage Land, and it was like, you know, without actually being at the gig, it was one of the best experiences I've ever had. It completely and utterly just you know, made me feel as if I just missed out on everything, and I just had to have a part of it. I mean, kind of like just songs like, you know, kind of Spanish Bombs, Lost in the Supermarket, just like Garage Land, just beautiful lyrics, just amazing. And like even stuff like Rude Boy.